Before we start this show, just a word from our sponsor, 20 by 20 Apparel. Founded in 2015, 20 by 20 Apparel brings original tributes to pro wrestling's classic arenas, moments, and events. They look to spotlight the bloopers, bleeps, and body slams along with the biggest, smallest, strangest, and strongest that pro wrestling has had to offer. Along with their awesome line of pro wrestling apparel, they do offer many services. In the world of wrestling, there are hundreds of shirts, promotions, flyers, social media accounts, and ads. Don't get lost in the sea of parody shirts and display fonts. They can provide professional graphic design services at a reasonable price. 20 by 20 also hand screen prints all the tees in-house. If you would like to discuss possible run of tees, posters, koozies, foam fingers, or whatever, drop them a line. Go to 20 by 20 Apparel. That's the number 20x, the number 20 apparel.com. Now, let's get to the show.
Fresh is the word.
I'm Jim Duggan, got long wood for plenty hoes. I keep it fresher than fresh, but you already know. You suckers bummy, I'm money, I got a ton of flows. My weed loud like a motherfucking thunder roll. Your shit quiet like you ballin' on a budget though. We see your kicks and we laugh and yellin' what are those. You see me shining like a suit on puffy. You know my grindin' shit is too strong, buddy. That's why the dude call money. I be stuntin' like it's nothing at all. Cause it's nothing to me, it's probably something to y'all. Trying to smoke like me, then come and fuck with your dog. Got a closet full of kicks, you can't cop it tomorrow. And I'm fresher than the freshest, you can tell it's in my essence. Bitch, you see the way I'm rapping, yes I do this shit to death. I tell I'm running out of breath, I tell somebody cut a check. But either way you know it's fresh, and either way you know it's fresh. Fresh, we fresh. Fresh, goddammit, we fresh.
Welcome to the Fresh is the Word podcast. I'm your host, Kelly K. Fresh Frazier. And on Fresh is the Word, we like to deliver wisdom through great stories from the minds of bright creatives of pop culture. Through those stories, we like to dissect the journey of our guests and present actionable lessons and advice for our listeners, no matter what career or avenue of artistry they pursue. And before we get into this episode, I want to give a shout out to Knox Money, Bang Belushi, and Foulmouth for the theme music for Fresh is the Word. And if you would like to support the podcast, you can always go to freshisthepodcast.com and just share any of the links for any of the episodes on any of your social media platforms. And also, you can subscribe to Fresh is the Word pretty much anywhere that podcasts are streamed. And that includes Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, pretty much everywhere. And please rate and review, especially on Apple Podcasts. It will definitely help out the show. If you want to contact me, you can always reach me by email at djkfresh@gmail.com. Or you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at KFresh is the Word, and on Facebook at facebook.com/KFresh. And you can also follow Fresh is the Word on Twitter at Fresh is the Word, and that's is with an IZ, Instagram at Fresh is the Word Podcast, and Facebook at facebook.com/Fresh is the Podcast. This is episode 171, and the guest for this episode is comic book writer Ron Marz, known for his work on titles such as Batman Aliens, DC vs. Marvel, Green Lantern, Silver Surfer, and Witchblade. Marz is currently writing Turok on Dynamite Entertainment. During our chat, we talked a little baseball, writing on one title for an extended period of time, his writing process, what makes a good creative team, his upbringing, how he broke into comics through Jim Starlin, and much, much more. And before we get into this interview with Ron Marz, I definitely want to remind you how you can support Fresh is the Word. I'm on Patreon now at patreon.com/Fresh is the Word. And for as little as $1 per month, you can support Fresh is the Word. And for the $3 a month tier, you can have access to the Patreon-only exclusive episodes, which I go deep into my audio archive of interviews that I've done for the past decade or so for various publications outside of Fresh is the Word, and that have never been used or never been used entirely. So definitely some cool treats in those Patreon-only exclusives. So go to patreon.com/freshtheword and check out all the tiers that are available. Some you'll be able to actually be a part of the podcast. So once more, go to patreon.com/freshtheword if you want to help support the podcast. All right, let's get on to the interview with Ron Marz. Cool, yeah, start things off. You were a suggestion by Lan Pitts when I interviewed him for the podcast of someone that would have some good stories to tell. And I was just reading your Twitter feed today, and you posted about the news of Tom Seaver, legendary New York Met, like the news that he's suffering from dementia. Isn't that so heartbreaking?
Yeah, it's he's like I said, he's actually shares a birthday with me,
right?
Or I should say, I share a birthday with him because he's Tom Seaver. So he's always been my favorite baseball player, and it hits a little closer to home for me because that's what my mom suffered from for the last 10 years of her life or so. So I've had an up close and very personal look at that disease, and it's it's heartbreaking that everything he accomplished and all of those memories, all of the triumphs that he had, and I think he's easily one of the best right-handed pitchers to ever play the game.
Yeah.
All that's going to be gone. All that's going to be, he's not going to know most of that stuff. And if it goes and if it goes in the way that it did with my mom, he'll have, he'll be able to remember a Mets game from August of 1972 that he pitched with crystal clarity, but what he did 10 minutes ago will be gone.
Right.
It's just that kind of, it's that kind of disease that that robs you of yesterday, but maybe something that happened 50 years ago is right there to be grasped.
Right. Yeah. When I was a kid, like someone like him is, before my time, but I was such a baseball fan that I just try to learn about everything from the past and present. So like anybody from baseball that anything happens to, man, it always sort of like tugs at my heart when something like this happens. And when I saw that today, I was like, oh man, that's so disheartening.
And, particularly in the 50th anniversary of the '69 Mets winning the World Series, I'm sure they had they had stuff. They're going to be doing stuff with the remaining members of that team and really celebrating the first World Championship. And he won't be there to take part in any of it.
Right. That's so disheartening. I was when I was looking over everything that you've done over the years, it's like you've had your you've written for a lot of different things, pretty much for all the companies. When you kind of look back and see in sort of think about your input into the comic book industry, what really sticks out in your mind? What were some of the great memories that you've always had?
Obviously that it's much more about the people that you work with, than the characters or the stories. Almost all of my best friends in the world are in comics. These are the people that I've forged relationships with over 30 years. That's to me the valuable thing that comes out of this. But in the broadest sense, I've made my living by making stuff up for 30 years. And I know I am utterly blessed to be able to do that. This is very literally a dream job. This is like, pitching for the New York Mets. This is the kind of thing that you dream about when you're 9 years old, and very few of us actually get to do it. So there's not a day that goes by that I'm not completely aware of how fortunate I am.
Right. A lot of times with a lot of these titles, you might, write on one issue or a few issues, but you had a long run with Witchblade. How is it like writing on one title for such a long time, what really is the key to staying with it for that long of a time?
You get onto titles, and some of them are really good fits, and some of them aren't. It's like shopping for clothes. You go into you pick out stuff you like on the rack, and then you take it into the changing room and see what actually fits. You just, because you don't know right off the bat. So I've been on books like Silver Surfer and Green Lantern and Witchblade that I stayed on for years because they were just great fits. And also, to a certain extent, the industry has moved away from long runs on books, but they still happen, just not as frequently. Right. When you get on a book that turns out to be the right fit, you don't want to leave. If you've got another story for next month and another and another and another, it's great to be able to stay on a book and build, kind of build a franchise as much as you can. I certainly got onto titles that turned out not to be good fits. I had always wanted to write Thor and wrote Thor for a year, and it stunk. It was not the right fit after all for any number of reasons. But often the books that you're not really thinking about and that you don't bring baggage to are the ones that end up being the one that's the best fit. For Witchblade, I don't know that I had ever even read a complete Witchblade issue when the book was offered to me, so I had to educate myself and pour through a box of 70 issues of Witchblade and figure out what made it tick, what made it work for me. And I think in some ways when you do that, you don't bring any preconceived notions with you. So right. when I sat down and read the box of Witchblade issues that Top Cow sent me, I didn't, I just looked for what I thought worked and the things that interested me, and made a list of that stuff. And then when we talked about it more, I said, okay, this is what I want to do. These are the things that I want to concentrate on. And very much to Top Cow's credit and my appreciation, they said, just do what you do. Write the kind of stories you want to write with this character and with this concept. And I guess I wrote it for damn near 10 years. Witchblade turned out to be one of those books where I could end up telling any kind of story I wanted to. I could tell a crime story, a horror story, a science fiction story, a superhero story. The concept was elastic enough that I could do really anything I wanted, and make it work. And I think because of that, I never got bored on the book. I never felt like, okay, I'm done here. I don't have anything else left to say. Even when we ended up stopping the book at issue 175, I still had more stories to go, which is always it's kind of a bummer when the book ends and yet you go off and do something else if you've got more stories left. But that's the way you always want to approach a title is you never want to feel like, oh geez, what can I do this month? You always want to feel like, geez, can't we do 2 issues every month because I've got all these stories in me. Right.
When you're on a long running book like Witchblade, and I see that you were on Green Lantern for a while, Silver Surfer, how far ahead are you looking issue wise, in the story wise?
It depends on well, to a certain extent, it depends on the era. I mean, when I was doing Green Lantern, if we didn't have 3 finished issues in the drawer, the creative team got it talking to. And nowadays, if you skin the issue out on the last day that it has to go to press, everybody's pretty happy. So the advent of technology that allows us to swap stuff back and forth to the printers and to the creative team very quickly has allowed us to run right up to the red line every month. So in the past, yeah, there'd always be issues in the can waiting to go to press, and you'd be working pretty far ahead. Now it really depends on the situation, and to a great extent, there aren't a lot of runs on titles right now that people stick around for 4, 5, 6 years. Certainly, like Jason Aaron has been doing Thor for a hell of a long time and doing just an awesome job. I love what he's doing, but that's really the exception rather than the rule. So generally, if you're hired to come in and do a storyline for a year or whatever it happens to be, you know what that storyline is going to be, and you know how you're going to fill that year. And then if you get to stick around, you have to come up with your next year. So it's always a process of kind of working on the issue that's in front of you, but always, at some point having to come up with an outline for the next 6 issues beyond that, or the next year beyond that. And it's like I said, it varies from editor to editor as well. But you usually, I always feel like I want to know where I am, and I want to know where I'm going. I want to know what the destination is. And then the stuff that happens in between is sometimes happenstance. You let the journey and the characters kind of dictate where you go.
Right.
I like to have an outline so I know where I'm headed. But I don't like to. I know there are I know writers that outline every scene of every issue very specifically before they even start the first issue, and that's great if it works for them. That doesn't work for me at all. I always felt like it kind of beat some of the magic out of the story. You're just sort of following an outline that you came up with rather than letting the story lead you where it wants to go. And that's just my particular way of approaching it. I like to be open to something else happening than I expected, and being able to follow that path wherever it leads.
You mentioned before that some of the things that you worked on, just weren't the right fit for you, then some were. What makes things a perfect fit? Is it things that you have to do personally, or is there just circumstances that are beyond your control that might not make it a perfect fit, or might make it a perfect fit?
If I knew that, I'd probably never have a book that doesn't quite click. You don't know, until you get into it. It's a lot of stuff. It's the character, it's the kind of story you're telling. It's absolutely the other members of the creative team. It's absolutely the editor you're working with. When all of that clicks, when all of that sort of falls in place, it's great. That stuff happened on Green Lantern. It happened on Witchblade. It becomes not like work at all when everything falls into place. And it's just kind of alchemy. You never know quite how things are gonna shake out until you get into it. I tend to be fairly picky about the artists I work with, because I'm very well aware that as a writer, your story is only as good as the person drawing it. So you'd better work with the best artists you can find.
Right.
So I tend to go back to a lot of the same artists, because I know that alchemy is there with certain people, with Rick Leonardi, with Darryl Banks, with Bart Sears. The writer and artist of a comic have to be, no pun intended, on the same page for it to work as well as it can and as it should. So when you find people that you work with well, you tend to go back to it.
Is it hard to find that right fit with other collaborators on these titles? How often does things just not work out? Honestly, not very often. I mean, I've only had a few. I wouldn't even call them bad experiences with artists. I've had
experiences that were less than great sometimes, where it just kind of, the project comes out and it's sort of average. It's not quite what you had hoped it would be, but it's fine. Really the worst day, working on comics is better than the best day doing a lot of other things. So I'm thankful for everybody that I've had the chance to work with, but sometimes it just doesn't click, and it's really, there's no specific reason why. A lot of times it's just that my storytelling sense and the artist storytelling sense aren't quite similar, or the artist might want more from me than I've gotten in the script, or less from me than I've gotten in the script. And I might be looking for more feedback from them. It's like being a matchmaker sometimes. It's like dating to a certain extent. You just never know where when sparks are going to fly, and two people are going to, or in the case of a creative team, obviously it's, writer, artist, but also the colorist, the letterer, everybody involved. When everybody clicks, there's a kind of magic to it.
What makes a great creative team? What does everybody got to bring to the table to make things work properly?
I think, that's a long answer. Actually, there's so many aspects to that we could do 3 shows on it.
Right.
But I think the biggest element for me is that there's got to be a sense of give and take between the writer and the artist. There has to be, you have to all be pulling in the same direction. Obviously, the artist, whether it's a penciler and a different inker, or somebody who's doing their own lines, and the colorist and the letterer, everybody's got to be on the same page, pulling in the same direction, telling the same story. But beyond that, I think specifically for the writer and the artist, there has to be some give and take. I have to give the artist room to do what he or she does, and I have to do my best to provide to that person what excites them, what gets them juice to go to the drawing board in the morning. It can't just be, it can't just be my vision of how to tell this story. There's got to be that give and take, and a sense of compromise between the two creators that really brings the story to life. I don't expect the artist to just take what's in my head, which goes onto the page in the script, and just be an art monkey. That's not the job. That's not, if that's what you as a writer want, first of all, you're in the wrong business. and second, just go get a studio full of, faceless artists to produce exactly what's in your script. The part of this that I love the most is when I get the pages back, when my script goes out and then a week goes by and I get the first pages back and see what my script has been turned into, how my script has been sort of breathed into life by the artist. That's the best part of this. It was the best part of it the first day on the job, and it's still the best part of it.
Do you like the sort of give and take nature of the creative process? How do you sort of resolve any conflicts? How do you pick how do you pick the battles that you want to really face?
Well, hopefully you don't have any battles. I mean, obviously that's if you're having constant battles, you're working with the wrong people. So I think when there are differences of opinion or disagreements, that's when compromise comes into it. I think a lot of it is trust. I trust the artist that I'm working with to take my script and make it come to life. And if I write a page that's got 5 panels on it, and the when the artist draws it, he or she has decided they need 6 panels to do it properly or 4 panels to do it properly. That's part of the process. As long as we're telling the same story, the details are just part of the process. And I always work. I generally work full script unless an artist wants plot style. I'm happy to do that as well. And some guys that I work with do that. The real joy of that, of those pages coming back, even if they're slightly different from what you wrote, my job is then go in and change the dialogue and work with what's on the page, and create something even better than either of us had intended in the first place.
Let's go back a little bit. How did you first get into wanting to be a comic book writer? What kind of kid were you? What did you do when you were young? What were some of your interests? And when did you eventually want to become a comic book writer?
I don't know that I had any. I mean, becoming a comic book writer is not like the most realistic career goal you could ever have.
Right.
Like I said, it's like, playing third base for the Yankees or pitching for the Mets. It's a dream, but most of the time, it's so unattainable that it just seems like, well, that's ridiculous. I always knew I was going to be a writer because that's what I could do. That's the thing that I was best at as a kid and through high school and college. I was a writer. When I graduated from college, I was already working at a daily newspaper as a reporter. So, I was going to make my living writing one way or another. It just never occurred to me to be anything else. I was working at a daily newspaper. I was friends with the comic creators that lived in my area, which included Bernie Wrightson, Joe Staten, Fred Hembeck, Terry Austin, and Jim Starlin. And I got to be, real close with all of those guys, but in particular with Jim. And Jim had me copy edit his first prose novel. And I did it as a favor, and I think I did it for a sushi dinner is what what the agreed upon cost was. And Jim liked what I did, and obviously I was aware of comics, I was a fan of comics, but these guys were my friends. These were the people who I hung out with. So Jim is the one who said to me, he actually said to me over lunch in a bagel joint one time after we had played racquetball in the morning. He said, "Hey, do you ever think about writing comics? You're good at this. I don't see why it wouldn't translate. Do you want to give that a try?" And, again, that's like somebody saying, "Hey, you want to go play for the Yankees?" Yeah. So that, that's literally my breaking in story is Jim Starlin said I should write comics. So I did. And Jim co-wrote my first few gigs with me, introduced me around at Marvel. And then I guess within a year or so, turned Silver Surfer over to me when he went off to do the Infinity Gauntlet miniseries and bring back the Warlock monthly series. So I inherited Surfer from him, and I've been doing it ever since.
Wow. During that time, what was some of the things that you learned about just the comic book writing and just writing in general from all those friends of yours?
Well, obviously there was a crash course in this is how you write a comic script from Jim. But I found, and Jim gave me a bunch of scripts to look at, and I compared them to how the actual issues came out when they were published. And it kind of went, oh, I can do this. I get it. It's visual storytelling. The first lesson that Jim ever gave me was that comic book panels are frozen moments in time. It's like watching a strip of film, actual film that goes through the camera in a theater rather than a digital projection. And it's the writer's job to come up with what's on that strip of film and then to pick out the specific moments that are going to be shown from that strip of film. Pick out individual images from that strip. So that's why it's frozen moments in time, because each panel is a frozen moment. You can show one thing in a panel. You can't show Batman jumping into the Batmobile and driving away in one panel. That's at least 2 actions and probably 3. And right off the bat, I got that. I understood that. There are a lot of writers that come into this business especially from other disciplines, from film, from novels, something like that. And it takes them quite a while to grasp that frozen moment in time specificity of the script. The writer of a comic really has to be able to think visually and to break down the action visually on the page and in each specific panel. And obviously then the writers, I always liken it to the writer is the guy who makes the blueprints, but the artist is the dude who actually builds the house. So my scripts are essentially a long letter to the artist to say, here, this is how I see the story in specific images. Then you go draw it how you want to. That to me is still the biggest lesson in writing comics is breaking down the action into those visuals per page and then per panel. I took a lot of film classes when I was in college. I was a film reviewer at the Daily Newspaper for a while. So I was very steeped in visual storytelling from a cinematic aspect, from a film aspect. And comics and movies are obviously sort of bastard cousins. The big difference is movies move, hence the name, and comics don't. They're single images. But a lot of the visual storytelling techniques are the same. The camera angles and the movement of the eye across the page, the movement of the eye across the movie screen, a lot of that stuff is very similar. So a lot of what I learned in film classes translated very easily to writing comic scripts.
How did you feel when you started that Silver Surfer run? What was your thoughts, your feelings when Jim kind of handed it over to you?
Oh, I was excited, man, because I was getting paid to do comics. That's crazy. I think I was too excited to have any real trepidation about it. I don't recall being nervous about it because I knew I could do it. I knew that this was like if my scripts were good enough for Jim Starlin to say, to have his name on them with mine and say to Marvel, this is what we're doing. That gave me the confidence to not really be overly nervous about it. So I was just excited and anxious to do everything I could. Anxious to do more work, to play with more toys in the toy box. It was really, it was very much on the job training because my first script ever was Silver Surfer Annual 3. I think that was the first thing I ever wrote, and I got to start my career by doing a book with Marvel. That's a fairly rare occurrence. It's a fairly rare occurrence back then, and it's even rarer now.
Right. I remember when I was a kid, in my neighborhood, there used to be this house that would give out comic books on Halloween. And I remember getting a Silver Surfer one, and I was just checking to see if it was during your run, but it was actually during Jim's run because it was number 43.
I think one of the other books that I did was I co-wrote 42 with Jim. So miss me by a month.
Right. Yeah, I was like, wait a minute, I have one. Let me check to see if it was on your run. But yeah, just missed you by
It was, it was a very cool day to walk into the comic store where I was already a customer,
right.
to walk into the comic store and have my first issue there. Very, very exciting, but you want to be cool about it. You don't want everybody to, see that you're hyperventilating because of your comic is actually out in the stands.
I've seen this discussion countless times on social media where people are like, who's more important, the writer or the artist? And I think it's kind of a bullshit discussion to have. What's your thoughts about that?
It is a bullshit discussion to have because the artist is more important.
Right.
It's, no artist, no comic.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's always a weird thing to me. I'm like, okay, why are you guys discussing this shit?
It's both parts are necessary, obviously, right?
Right.
Both parts, and you want both parts to work well, to work together, because the product is much better when both parts work. However, nobody wants to read my scripts, right? Like my scripts are read by like 5 people in the world. My scripts are read by the artist, hopefully the colorist, the letterer, and the editor. That's it, man. Nobody reads that shit. It's raw material to build something else. But what every line that the artist puts down is what people see.
Yeah.
So yes, the story is necessary. There has to be a story. However, an artist can sit down and draw a story without my input whatsoever, and it's still a comic. But I can't write a script and hand it to somebody and say this is a comic, because it's not.
Right. What is it, in your opinion, about comics that are just so magical?
It's that intersection of most of the time words and pictures, but even sometimes just story and pictures, because you don't really even need words to tell your story visually. So it's that aspect of telling the story with pictures, generally words and pictures, and it's what you get at the end of that process is much more than you could do separately. It's a comic is a refined product of words and pictures that you could not get from words alone or from pictures alone to a great extent. And we as a species have been telling stories with pictures since we've been painting on cave walls. We're a visual species. People talk about what was the first comic. Well, the first comic was about cavemen hunting elk,
right,
and painting that on walls. Right. Those are the first comics.
Yeah.
Because we as a species tell stories visually, or at least one of the ways we tell stories is visually, and obviously. As a modern society, when we tell stories through single images, we tell stories through moving images, we tell stories through augmented reality now, but it's one of the ways we communicate with each other and have for centuries upon centuries. And I think people examine, people sort of navel gaze about, what makes comics special, and it's a huge discussion that would fill tomes, but I think at its base level, it's that magic of words and pictures, and it's how we tell stories to each other, and we react to those stories in a different way when there are pictures as opposed to when they're not.
Now let's talk Comic Cons now. When you do a Comic Con, what do you know when you're talking to the people that come up to your table or come to talk to you? You know, what sort of questions are they asking? What sort of stories are they talking about?
Usually it's personal stuff. Usually it's, I've had this comic since I was 10 years old and it's the first one I bought, or a story that somehow touched them or affected them. That's all hugely satisfying to realize that you had some effect on somebody's life, even if it was just making a story that they enjoyed, or sometimes somebody tells you this, these comics got me through high school. It's you never know what you're going to get, but there's always some sort of personal attachment to it, which is phenomenal and flattering. Once in a while, somebody wants to know how the process works. They want to peek behind the curtain. Or somebody wants to know, what it was like to work with a certain artist or that kind of stuff. But generally it's very personalized, and it's very much about the experience they had with that story, the experience that person had with this thing that came out of my head, and I worked with an artist to make it a real thing, and then somebody discovered it when they were when they were an adult, a kid, or whatever. It's kind of cool that I can have that experience with somebody at a convention or a signing. Somebody had that experience with my work, just like I had that experience with other people's work when I was a kid. I always feel like the stuff that you discover at 10 or 11 or 12 years old is what stays with you the rest of your life.
Right.
That's sort of a magical age where the world is opening up to you, and the things that you discover at that point are pretty special. I mean, for me, it's Edgar Rice Burroughs, Robert E. Howard, certain comics that I read at that age, certain movies I saw at that age. I saw Star Wars when I was 11. When I was I was like 11 and a half, like absolutely the right age to have my mind blown by that, which probably has a lot to do with why I do what I do. So I think that the stuff that you get a hold of at that age is pretty awesome, and it stays with you for the rest of your life. So the fact that I sometimes meet people who had that experience with my work when they were that age, and it has stayed with them the rest of their lives is really precious.
To kind of extend on that, and it might be a loaded question, what has there been, like, what is that single issue or that run of a comic book, something that you didn't write that really touched you, that always just sort of pops into your head even to this day?
Well, it's a couple of different ones. I mean, when Jim Starlin, who would, obviously going to be one of my best friends, did the Avengers annual and the Marvel 2-in-1 annual, that I plucked off of a spinner rack as a kid, and it was the final story of what was then the final story of Thanos and Warlock. Those two issues affected me in a huge way because Warlock got killed, and then Thanos got turned to stone at the end of it. I mean, these were permanent things that happened in a comic, and permanent stuff just didn't happen in comics.
Right.
Like when I was a kid, to have something that sort of earth-shaking happen in those pages, and then the story ends, and there's not another one next month. It's just they're just done, and you're not going to see Warlock and Thanos again. Was hugely affecting on me. It was pretty earth-shaking to me. So that, like, in maybe those were 1977, 78, something like that. I think 77. So that was a pretty big deal. And then when 1986 rolled around and Dark Knight Returns came out, followed, I think, shortly thereafter by Watchmen. I think Dark Knight was first, but I'm not positive. I probably read Dark Knight first, if nothing else. Like those two books coming out in 1986, which were really, I think everybody looks at that as the year that comics sort of grew up and everybody noticed them as more than just kid stuff, even though they had certainly not been just kid stuff for years. But that's sort of when the culture at large kind of noticed comics because of Dark Knight and Watchmen. So I got pulled into both of those in a big way, but especially Dark Knight because of the art, because of the format. I was really kind of blown away by that first issue, and I think that's probably what, to a great extent, planted the seed in my head that, man, this would be really cool to do, even though it's impossible and it will never happen. But 4 years later, I was doing it.
Nice. Out of everything that you have written, is there anything that means the most to you?
I think like I said, I totally think I have the greatest job ever. So I'm not. It's hard to pick any of this stuff, but I think the creator-owned books that I've done are probably more precious to me than the other stuff, because those are the ones that didn't exist before. You come in and you pick up Silver Surfer or Green Lantern, even though we started a different Green Lantern. Those are still the company's toys, and you understand that going in, and it's great. It's a really wonderful way to create. It's a wonderful way to make a living. But the stuff that you do, that you create from scratch, from the ground floor up, I think is always a little bit more precious to you. I think it's the difference between raising your own kids and raising somebody else's kids. So the creator-owned books that I've done, like Samurai Heaven and Earth at Dark Horse, Dragon Prince at Top Cow, Shinku at Image, and some more stuff that I have coming up. It's those are always books that I think are a little nearer and dearer because they didn't exist before. You've created them from whole cloth, and they're also exactly what you want. They're also exactly what you want them to be. I remember when the first issue of Samurai Heaven and Earth came out from Dark Horse, and it was, I don't know, it was maybe 2004 or 2005. I don't remember the year specifically, but when I got my copies, when I got my comps of the first issue, and looked through it, and it was the most satisfying feeling in the world, because nothing was compromised. Everything was exactly the way I wanted it, and I think exactly the way that the artist and the co-owner of it, Luke Ross, wanted it, because it was our book. It was not going to be sent off to press until we approved every page. There was not going to be any editorial meddling with it. There was not going to be any compromises on our part for that book. And the stuff that you do that's your own, I think, is always a little more special.
This is a question I really like to ask in all my interviews is, what is a bit of like a nugget of knowledge from your life or career that anybody listening to this, no matter what avenue of artistry that they're in, whether they like comic books or not, that they could sort of project into their own life?
There's a raft of them. I think if you want to write, you have to read. That's certainly near the top of the list. If you want to be a writer, you have to be a reader. And if you want to write comics, that doesn't mean just read comics. Yes, read comics, but read novels, read nonfiction, read magazine articles, read everything that you can get your hands on, because it's all grist for the mill. It's all fuel, and you take it in, and much of it comes out some other way in some other form in the stories that you write. So you have to read. You have to go have a life. You have to go have experiences. You have to get out of your office or whatever place that you write. Go out and do things. Go out and have experiences. Go out and have an experience with the world at large. Travel. Every experience that you have is something that you can draw upon. It's something that you can reach. You can reach into your brain and pull this stuff out. And you don't know how it's going to come out or when it's going to come out. There's probably stuff that I experienced or saw 20 years ago that comes out in stories now, and it's just because that stuff is part of me. Ultimately, when you write, you are pulling stuff out of yourself, so you have to constantly be filling yourself up in some way, shape, or form. Read, watch good TV, watch films, go for a walk in the woods, go do things. Don't just sit on the couch.
So what are you up to these days? What's the future got in store?
Let's see. Tonight I have to work on the next Turok script. I'm writing Turok for Dynamite. Which, as you might suspect, involves a lot of dinosaurs.
Right.
Dynamite said, "What's your take on Turok?" And I said, "I think my take on Turok is a guy fights dinosaurs." And they said, "Okay, that sounds good." So I'm writing Turok. I'm finishing up my last issue of Fathom for Aspen, which I really enjoyed doing, and I hope to do more stuff with those guys. It was my first time working for Aspen, and working with Sia Ohm on art and Peter Steigerwald, and my editor is Vince Hernandez. Had a really good experience with those guys. And I'm the editor-in-chief and lead writer for Ominous Press, which is the publishing company that I'm part of with Bart Sears. Sean Husvar is our publisher. Andy Smith is the art director. So we do single issue comics through IDW. We do graphic novels that we publish ourselves. We did Beasts of the Black Hand, which is an original graphic novel that I did with Matthew Dow Smith from a concept by my friend Paul Harding, who is an amazing sculptor for DC Direct and Gentle Giant and a bunch of places. So we're working on the sequel to that, a couple other graphic novels. I'm back with my Green Lantern artist, Darryl Banks. We're doing a World War II graphic novel called Harkin's Raiders that we kickstarted in December. So Darryl's getting to the end of the pages on that. Got a couple other projects that we're working on right now, one with Rick Leonardi, one with Peter Krause. Rick and I have a different graphic novel to do for a publisher that we haven't actually signed the contract yet, so I probably shouldn't mention them, although the contract, the amended contract just landed in my inbox about 3 hours ago, so all looks good there. So I have so between being the editor-in-chief and writing stuff, and it's I never have a day when I get up and sit at the desk and go, boy, I wonder what happens today. There's always something to keep me occupied. And like I said, I've been making stuff up for 30 years and seems to be no end in sight. So I'm very blessed.
Great. And I always like to end my interviews with the same question, and I gave it to you ahead of time. Who is somebody from your life or career that I could realistically interview for this podcast that would have some good stories or lessons to talk about?
Well, I think the easiest, the obvious guys for me to turn you over to are my partners in Ominous Press. Bart Sears is one of the best artists I know, one of my best friends, and has an amazing ability to break down drawing. In fact, his second How to Draw book is on Kickstarter right now. And I actually edited the first volume, which is comprised of a lot of Bart's old Brute and Babe columns from Wizard magazine, all updated, all revised, plus a bunch of new lessons as well. So just editing that book, I learned a lot about the thing that I can't do, which is draw. But even as a writer, it gives you a better sensibility of how the artist approaches his or her job, and what you as the writer can do to help the artist do his or her job. So you should talk to Bart. You should talk to Graham Nolan, who is actually publishing a book through Ominous called Monster Island, which is actually one of my favorite things that Graham's ever done. It's very much a sort of pulp, classic sci-fi giant monster movie translated into comics. And then I guess the star on top of the tree is Jim Starlin.
Yeah, I was just while you were talking about him, I searched Jim online, and I see that he's originally from here in Detroit.
That is true. Jim is a Detroit native. So is my buddy Terry Austin. They're both from Detroit. There was kind of a chunk of guys that came out of Detroit in the early 70s to come work at Marvel. Al Milgram, Jim Starlin, Terry Austin. So there's whatever was going on in whatever was in the water in Detroit in the early 70s made some created some amazing comics dudes. But yeah, Jim is from Detroit, still has family back there. Jim's dad actually worked at one of the auto plants, and brought home drafting paper and pencils, and that's how Jim started to draw on contraband drawing paper from an auto plant. So Detroit is very much in Jim's DNA. Great.
It's been great talking with you. Where can people go online to get more information about what you're doing?
The easiest place, or the place where I am the most, is Twitter, which is just at Ron Marz. There's ronmarz.com is my website. It hasn't been updated in a while, but we'll get around to that at some point soon. And then for the Ominous Press stuff, it's ominouspress.com, where you can get any of the stuff, any of the products that the books that we've done, and prints and posters and all sorts of stuff like that as well. So ominouspress.com, ronmarz.com. There's a fan Facebook page for me that I will answer questions on when I know that they're there, but that's not one that I monitor on any sort of regular basis. So if you really want my attention, ping me on Twitter.
Cool. Yeah, it's been great talking with you, man. Thanks for chatting with me.
No problem. Happy to do it, dude.
All right, that was my interview with Ron Marz. It was great talking with him. More information and links to where you can follow Ron Marz online will be in the show notes for this episode at freshasthepodcast.com. Now remember, go live life with intensity with a capital 10. All right, goodbye and good night.
Fresh is the word.